The scream tore from Thea Gallagher's throat before she could stop it, raw and primal as the buckskin Bronc twisted mid-air and came down wrong, hooves scrambling for purchase that wasn't there, and the crack that split the morning air was so sharp and terrible that every person in the dusty corral froze. The rider, a lean cowboy with sun-darkened skin and hair the color of wheat, went down with the animal, and Thea watched in horror as 1,200 pounds of terrified horseflesh rolled across his body before staggering up on 3 trembling legs, leaving the man motionless in the dirt. It was July of 1882, and Thea had been in Yuba City, California for exactly 3 weeks, long enough to know that bronc breaking was dangerous work, but not long enough to have witnessed death this close. She had come west from Ohio to live with her aunt after her parents succumbed to consumption, and the heat of the Sacramento Valley was still foreign to her, the dry air sucking moisture from her skin, the endless blue sky so different from the clouded horizons of home. But none of that mattered now as she hiked up her skirts and ran toward the corral fence, her sensible boots kicking up dust, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Get back, miss," someone shouted, but Thea was already climbing the rough-hewn rails, splinters catching at her palms. The bronc was limping in circles, whinnying its distress, but it was the cowboy who held her attention. He lay on his back, eyes closed, his chest rising and falling in shallow gasps that meant he was alive, but told her nothing about how badly he was hurt. Blood seeped from a gash on his forehead, tracking through the dust that coated his face. Bennett, another man, vaulted the fence, older and grizzled, his face creased with worry. "Bennett, boy, can you hear me?" The cowboy's eyes fluttered open, blue as a mountain lake, and Thea saw the exact moment the pain hit him because his whole body went rigid. He tried to move and couldn't, tried again, and the sound that came from his lips was half gasp, half sob. "Don't move him," Thea heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt. She had helped her mother tend to sick neighbors back in Ohio, had learned the basics of nursing from a woman who believed idle hands were the devil's playground. His back might be broken. The older man's face went white. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. We need a door or a board, something flat and sturdy," Thea continued, kneeling beside the injured cowboy despite the protests around her. Up close, she could see he was young, maybe 25 or 26, with a strong jaw and weathered skin that spoke of years working under the California sun. "And we need to get him out of this heat." Bennett's eyes found hers, and she saw the fear there, stark and undisguised. "Can't feel my legs," he whispered, and the words were like shards of glass. "Don't think about that right now," Thea said, keeping her voice calm even as her mind raced. "We're going to move you very carefully. What's your full name?" "Bennett Parker." He drew in a ragged breath. "That bronc, is he hurt bad?" Even now, lying broken in the dirt, he was worried about the horse. Something in Thea's chest twisted. "I don't know. We'll check on him once we get you taken care of." The older man, who introduced himself as Cyrus, brought a wide plank from the barn, and together with 2 other ranch hands, they began the delicate process of sliding Bennett onto it. Every movement made him grit his teeth, sweat breaking out across his forehead despite the relative coolness of the morning. Thea held his head steady, her fingers gentle in his dusty hair, murmuring reassurances she wasn't sure she believed. "Where are we taking him?" Cyrus asked. "His place is 3 miles out," one of the hands said. "He's got a cabin on the Parker spread." "Too far in this heat," Thea said. "My aunt's boarding house is 2 blocks from here. We can take him there." She didn't ask permission, didn't consider that her Aunt Margaret might have objections to housing a broken cowboy. All she knew was that Bennett Parker needed help, and she had 2 hands and a will to give it. They carried him through the streets of Yuba City, past the general store and the saloon, past curious onlookers who stopped to stare. Thea walked beside the makeshift stretcher, one hand on Bennett's shoulder, feeling the tremors that ran through him. Aunt Margaret met them at the door of the boarding house, a tall woman with iron-gray hair and a no-nonsense expression that faltered when she saw the state of their patient. "Thea, what have you done?" "He needs help, Aunt. His back is injured, possibly broken. I couldn't leave him." Something passed across Margaret's face, some old memory or pain, but she stepped aside and pointed to the downstairs room she kept for storage. "Put him in there. I'll clear it out. Thea, fetch Dr. Morrison from his office on Main Street." Thea ran, her skirts tangling around her ankles, the afternoon heat pressing down like a physical weight. Dr. Morrison was a stooped man with kind eyes who listened to her breathless explanation and gathered his bag without hesitation. By the time they returned to the boarding house, Bennett had been settled on a narrow bed, and Aunt Margaret had stripped away his dusty shirt to reveal a chest bronzed by the sun and marked with old scars. The doctor's examination was thorough and gentle, but Thea saw Bennett's hands clench in the quilt when Morrison pressed along his spine. Finally, the doctor straightened, his expression grave. "The spine is damaged, but I don't believe it's completely severed. There's swelling, and that's what's causing the paralysis. Whether he'll walk again depends on whether that swelling goes down and how much permanent damage was done." "What can we do?" Thea asked. "Keep him still." "Absolute bed rest for at least a month, maybe longer. Ice if you can get it, though in this heat that'll be difficult. Watch for fever, keep him clean and fed." Morrison met her eyes. "It's going to be a long road, and there's no guarantee at the end of it." After the doctor left, Thea found herself alone with Bennett. Aunt Margaret had gone to make broth, and the other men had returned to their work. The room was quiet except for the sound of Bennett's breathing and the distant clatter of a wagon passing on the street outside. "You should go," Bennett said, his voice rough. "This isn't your burden." "You're right, it isn't," Thea replied, pulling a chair close to the bed. "But I'm staying anyway." "Why?" The blue eyes studied her, confused and wary. Thea considered the question. She barely knew this man. They had exchanged perhaps 10 words before the accident. By all rights, she should let his friends and family handle his care. But when she had seen him lying in that dirt, when she had heard the fear in his voice, something in her had responded with a certainty she couldn't explain. Because when that horse went down, you didn't curse or scream. Your first words were asking if the animal was all right. That tells me something about who you are, Bennett Parker. She smoothed the quilt over his chest. And because 3 weeks ago, I watched my mother die and there was nothing I could do to help her, but I can help you. So I will. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of heat and careful tending. Thea learned to change bandages, to help Bennett with the humiliating necessities of bed rest, to read the subtle signs of pain in the tightness around his eyes. Aunt Margaret proved to be an unexpected ally, her brisk efficiency hiding a deep well of compassion. The other boarders, a mix of miners and merchants, took to checking on Bennett, bringing him newspapers and books, playing cards with him when the pain wasn't too bad. But it was Thea who was there through the long nights when Bennett lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with a future that looked nothing like the one he had planned. It was Thea who held the basin when infection set in during the 2nd week, and he burned with fever, delirious and thrashing. It was Thea who sat beside him and read aloud from novels until her voice went hoarse, who bathed his face with cool cloths and whispered fierce demands that he fight, that he live. "Tell me about Ohio," Bennett said one evening when the worst of the fever had passed. The sun was setting, painting the room in shades of gold and amber, and Thea had just finished helping him eat a bowl of stew. "It's green," Thea said, settling back in her chair. "Everything here is brown and gold, but Ohio is green. Trees everywhere, and the humidity makes the air feel thick. In summer, you can hear the cicadas singing and thunderstorms roll in like ocean waves. Sounds different from here. Very different, but not better, just different." She folded her hands in her lap. "Tell me about the Parker spread. What's it like?" Bennett's face softened. "It's not much. Just a small ranch my pa started before he passed. Got about 50 head of cattle, some chickens, a vegetable garden that my sister tends when she visits. The cabin sits up on a rise and you can see the Sutter butts in the distance on clear days." His voice dropped. "Don't know if I'll ever see it again." "Don't talk like that." "Why not? It's the truth, isn't it? Even if I live through this, even if the swelling goes down, the doc said there's no guarantee I'll walk." The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. "What good is a cowboy who can't ride?" Thea reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength still present in his fingers. "You're more than what you do for a living, Bennett Parker, and we don't know yet what the future holds. So for now, focus on healing. You sound like my ma used to before the cholera took her. Smart woman." That earned her a faint smile, the first she had seen from him in days. "She was. Tough as nails and twice as sharp. Would have liked you, I think." The comment warmed Thea more than it should have. She found herself thinking about it later that night as she lay in her own bed upstairs, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling into sleep. Somewhere in the past 3 weeks, Bennett had stopped being a stranger and started being someone she cared about. She knew the way he took his coffee, black with 2 sugars. She knew he had a scar on his left shoulder from a mountain lion encounter when he was 16. She knew he could recite poetry from memory because his mother had made him learn it as a boy. And sometimes when the pain was bad, he would whisper lines from Longfellow to distract himself. She knew the sound of his laugh, rare but genuine, and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when something truly amused him. She knew he worried about his ranch, about the cattle that his neighbor was looking after, about whether he was imposing too much on her aunt's hospitality. And she knew with a certainty that should have frightened her that she was falling in love with him. It was a foolish thing, impractical and inconvenient. She barely knew him. He might never walk again. There were 1,000 reasons why she should guard her heart, and yet Thea found she didn't want to. Bennett Parker, broken and hurting, fighting to reclaim his life with quiet determination, was worth the risk. The breakthrough came on a sweltering August afternoon when Thea was reading to Bennett from a collection of Mark Twain stories. She had just reached a particularly funny passage when Bennett suddenly went rigid, his eyes wide. "What's wrong?" Thea set the book aside, reaching for his hand. "Are you in pain, my foot?" Bennett said, his voice shaking. "Thea, I felt something. My right foot, I felt it." Thea threw back the light sheet that covered him and placed her hand on his bare foot. "Can you feel this?" "Yes, it's faint, but yes." "Try to move your toes." Bennett's face contorted with concentration, and for a long moment, nothing happened. Then, so slightly Thea almost missed it, his big toe twitched. It was the smallest of movements, barely there, but it might as well have been a mountain moving for the hope that surged through her. "You did it," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "Bennett, you moved it." "Don't cry," Bennett said, and she realized his own eyes were wet. "I can't stand it when you cry. These are happy tears, you fool." Over the next week, the sensation returned gradually, creeping up from his feet to his ankles, from his ankles to his calves. The paralysis was retreating, and with it came pain, nerve endings awakening like 1,000 tiny fires. Bennett bore it with gritted teeth and white-knuckled determination, and Thea was there for all of it, measuring progress in inches and millimeters. Dr. Morrison was cautiously optimistic. "The swelling is definitely going down. Keep doing what you're doing and we'll see how far the recovery goes." "When can I try to stand?" Bennett asked. "Not yet. Give it another month at least. Push too soon and you could undo all this progress." Bennett's frustration was palpable, but he listened. Thea understood the enforced stillness was torture for a man used to being active, used to working from sunrise to sunset. She did what she could to keep him occupied, teaching him card games she had learned back in Ohio, convincing Aunt Margaret to let her bring in a chess set, reading until her voice gave out, and they talked. Oh, how they talked. Thea learned that Bennett had wanted to be a teacher when he was young, had loved books and learning until his father's death forced him to take over the ranch at 18. She learned he had a sister named Caroline who lived in Sacramento with her husband, a banker, and that they had grown apart over the years as their lives took different paths. She learned he had been engaged once, to a girl named Sarah, but she had broken it off when she realized she couldn't handle ranch life. In turn, Thea shared her own stories. The childhood in Ohio, the slow decline of her parents as consumption ravaged their bodies, the decision to come west and start fresh. She told him about her dream of opening a school someday, about her love of teaching and learning. She confessed her fear of ending up alone, of becoming a spinster in a world that valued women primarily for their marriages and children. "You're 22, Bennett said one evening. "Hardly on the shelf. 22 and unmarried is practically ancient in some circles." "Then those circles are full of idiots." Bennett shifted carefully, trying to ease the ache in his back. "Any man would be lucky to have you, Thea Gallagher." The way he said her name, soft and warm, made her pulse quicken. "You're only saying that because I've been feeding you and reading to you for weeks. I'm saying it because it's true." His blue eyes held hers, serious and intent. "You're smart and kind and braver than anyone I've ever met. You didn't have to stay, didn't have to care for a stranger, but you did. That means something." Thea felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the August temperature. "You're not a stranger anymore, Bennett." "No," he agreed quietly. "I suppose I'm not." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Thea was afraid to name. She wanted to lean forward, to close the distance between them, to find out if his lips were as soft as they looked. But Bennett was her patient, dependent on her care, and it wouldn't be right to take advantage of that. So instead, she picked up the book again and continued reading, pretending not to notice the way Bennett's gaze lingered on her face. September brought cooler temperatures and a letter from Bennett's sister. Caroline arrived 2 days later in a flurry of expensive skirts and genuine concern, embracing her brother with tears streaming down her face. "Why didn't you send for me immediately?" she demanded. "I had to hear about this from Cyrus when he came to Sacramento on business." "Didn't want to worry you," Bennett said, but his smile was genuine. "I'm all right, Caro, getting better every day." Caroline turned to Thea, taking in her simple dress and work-worn hands with a shrewd gaze. "You must be Miss Gallagher. Cyrus told me you've been caring for my brother." "Yes, madam. I can't thank you enough." Caroline's voice was sincere, her eyes soft. "Bennett is stubborn as an ox. I'm amazed you got him to stay in bed this long." "It wasn't easy," Thea admitted. Over the next few days, Caroline visited frequently, bringing treats from the city and gossip about people Bennett knew. Thea found herself liking the other woman despite their obvious differences. Caroline was polished where Thea was practical, refined where Thea was straightforward, but they shared a determination to see Bennett recover fully. It was Caroline who convinced Dr. Morrison to allow Bennett to try standing with support. On a cool morning in late September, with Thea on one side and Cyrus on the other. Bennett placed his feet on the floor for the first time in nearly 3 months. The effort it took was visible in every line of his body, muscles trembling with the strain, sweat beading on his forehead. But he stood, even if only for 30 seconds before his legs gave out and they had to lower him back to the bed. The triumph in his eyes was worth every moment of doubt and fear that had come before. "I'm going to walk again," Bennett said, breathing hard. "I'm going to ride again." "Yes, you are," Thea agreed, her hand still gripping his arm. Progress after that was steady but slow. Each day, Bennett spent a little more time on his feet, first leaning heavily on Thea and Cyrus, then using a cane, then finally, in mid-October, taking his first unaided steps across the small room. Thea watched with her heart in her throat as he made it from the bed to the door and back again, his gait unsteady but determined. "I need to go home," Bennett said that evening. "I need to see the ranch, make sure everything's all right." "You're not strong enough yet," Thea protested. "I'm strong enough to sit in a wagon. Cyrus can drive me out tomorrow, let me see the place, check on things. I'll be back before supper." Thea wanted to argue, but she saw the need in his eyes. The ranch was part of him, as essential as breathing, and he had been away too long. "All right. But you have to promise to rest if you get tired." "I promise." She rode along the next day, unable to bear the thought of Bennett making the journey without her. The wagon seat was hard, the road dusty, but the countryside that unfolded around them was beautiful in a stark, golden way. They passed farms and orchards, crossed the Feather River at a shallow ford, climbed into rolling hills dotted with oak trees. The Parker Ranch sat exactly as Bennett had described it, a small cabin on a rise with a view of distant mountains. The cattle grazed peacefully in a nearby pasture. The garden had gone to seed, but the place had a sense of rightness about it, as if it had grown from the land itself. Bennett sat in the wagon for a long moment, just looking, his jaw tight with emotion. Then Cyrus helped him down, and he walked slowly to the cabin door, each step deliberate and careful. Thea followed, curious to see the place where Bennett had grown up. The inside was simple but tidy. One large room that served as kitchen and living area, a bedroom in the back, a loft overhead. The furniture was handmade but sturdy, the kind of pieces built to last. Books lined a shelf near the fireplace, and Thea recognized some of the titles she had read to Bennett during his recovery. "It's not much," Bennett said, watching her reaction. "It's perfect," Thea replied honestly. "It feels like home." Something in Bennett's expression shifted, became more intense. "Thea, I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." Her heart began to pound. "All right. These past 4 months you've saved my life. Not just by taking me in and caring for me, but by giving me a reason to fight. Every morning, I woke up wanting to get better because it meant I'd get to see you. Every small victory felt bigger because you were there to share it." He took a careful step toward her. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I'm still not fully healed, still don't know if I'll ever be the man I was before. But I can't let you walk away without telling you that I love you, Thea Gallagher. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you refuse to give up on people. I love the sound of your voice when you read, the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating, the feel of your hand in mine." Thea's breath caught in her throat. "Bennett, I'm not asking you to say it back. I just needed you to know. Needed you to understand that you're not just the woman who nursed me back to health. You're the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with if you'll have me." For a moment, Thea couldn't speak around the lump in her throat. Then she crossed the distance between them and took both his hands in hers. "You foolish, wonderful man. Don't you know I fell in love with you weeks ago? I tried not to. I told myself it was just the circumstances, just the closeness forced by your injury. but every day I fell a little harder. The way you never complained even when I knew you were in agony. The way you worried about everyone else before yourself. The way you looked at me like I was something precious and rare." Bennett's hands tightened on hers. "You mean it. You love me, with everything I am." He kissed her then, careful and gentle, and Thea felt the world narrow to the press of his lips against hers, the warmth of his body, the rightness of being in his arms. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, she saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. "Marry me," Bennett said. "I know it's fast, I know there are 100 practical reasons to wait, but I don't want to waste another day. Marry me, Thea, be my wife, my partner, help me build a life here." "Yes," Thea said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I'll marry you." Cyrus, who had been tactfully examining the cattle from a distance, chose that moment to return, took one look at their faces and grinned. "About damn time. I was starting to think you two were both blind." They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the boarding house, with Aunt Margaret beaming and Caroline dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Thea wore a cream-colored dress that Margaret had altered from her own wedding gown, and Bennett stood straight and tall, only the slightest hitch in his step betraying his lingering recovery. "Doctor." Morrison gave the bride away, and Cyrus stood as Bennett's best man, and the local minister pronounced them husband and wife in front of a gathering of friends and neighbors who had come to care for the young couple. The wedding night was tender and sweet, Bennett careful with Thea's innocence, Thea patient with the limitations his injury still imposed. They learned each other slowly, mapping skin and breath and the sounds of pleasure, and when they finally joined, it felt like coming home. Life on the ranch was harder than Thea had expected, but more rewarding. She learned to milk cows and gather eggs, to tend the garden and preserve food for winter. Bennett taught her to ride, starting with an old mare named Daisy who was patient with her fumbling, progressing to a younger horse as her confidence grew. They worked side by side, building the ranch back up, adding to the herd, repairing fences and buildings. Bennett continued to heal, the strength returning to his back and legs, though he would never be quite as quick or flexible as he had been before the accident. He made peace with the limitations, finding new ways to work, accepting help when he needed it. And he was scrupulous about safety, refusing to break Broncs anymore, leaving that dangerous work to younger, less damaged men. The winter of 1882 was mild, and Thea discovered she was pregnant in January. The news filled Bennett with a joy so fierce it took her breath away. He was gentle with her, almost comically overprotective, until she threatened to brain him with a frying pan if he didn't let her continue her normal work. Their son was born in September of 1883, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. They named him James after Bennett's father, and Thea had never known she could love anything as much as she loved that squalling, perfect infant. Bennett was a devoted father, walking the floor with James when he cried at night, singing him the same songs his mother had sung to him. Caroline visited often, bringing gifts and news from Sacramento. Her husband, Richard, proved to be a good man who cared deeply for his wife, and the two couples became close friends. Aunt Margaret came for extended stays, teaching Thea the finer points of cooking and sewing, spoiling young James outrageously. The ranch prospered. Bennett's reputation as an honest, hard-working rancher grew, and they were able to expand, buying the adjacent property when the owner retired and moved to San Francisco. They hired 2 hands, young men eager to learn, and the Parker spread became known for quality cattle and fair dealing. In the spring of 1885, Thea gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Rose, identical down to the dimples in their cheeks. The cabin was bursting at the seams with children, so Bennett and the hands built an addition, adding 2 bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. Thea started a small school in town, teaching the children of local farmers and ranchers 3 days a week, fulfilling the dream she had carried from Ohio. Bennett never did return to Bronc breaking, but he found he didn't miss it. His life was full of other things, better things. Mornings spent teaching James to rope a fence post. Evenings with Thea on the porch, watching the sun set over the Sutter butts while the twins played in the dirt at their feet. Sundays at church, the whole family dressed in their best, singing hymns with voices that ranged from Bennett's steady bass to the girls' piping soprano. There were hard times, too. A drought in 1886 that nearly broke them, saved only by careful management and a loan from Richard. A bout of influenza that swept through in 1887, leaving all 3 children sick and Thea exhausted from nursing them. The occasional conflict with neighboring ranchers over water rights and grazing boundaries. But through it all, Thea and Bennett held fast to each other. The love that had bloomed in a small room in a boarding house, born from tragedy and nurtured through recovery, only deepened with time. They learned the rhythms of each other's bodies and minds, the unspoken language of long married couples. Bennett still brought Thea wildflowers from the hills. Thea still read to him in the evenings, though now it was often children's stories with James and the twins crowding around. On a warm evening in July of 1892, exactly 10 years after the Bronc had snapped Bennett's spine, they sat together on the porch and watched their children play in the yard. James was 9 now, tall and serious, already showing signs of the man he would become. The twins were 7, still identical but developing distinct personalities. Emma was bold and adventurous, always climbing trees and chasing after her brother. Rose was quieter, thoughtful, with a love of books that reminded Bennett of himself at that age. "Do you ever think about that day?" Thea asked, leaning against Bennett's shoulder. "The accident?" "Sometimes," Bennett admitted. "Usually when my back aches in the cold weather. But not with regret, not anymore. That broken Bronc brought me you. Hard to regret something that gave me everything I have." Thea tilted her face up to look at him, this man she had loved for a decade, whose face was now as familiar to her as her own. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there in 1882, gray threaded through the wheat-colored hair, but he was still the same man who had worried about the horse even as he lay broken in the dirt. "I love you, Bennett Parker." "I love you too, Thea Parker." He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips, soft and sweet. "Thank you for carrying me home. Thank you for staying. Always," Thea promised, "for all the days of my life." The years continued to unfold, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. James grew into a fine young man, strong and capable, with his father's love of the land and his mother's quick mind. He took over more and more of the ranch work as Bennett's back stiffened with age, but Bennett never minded. Watching his son thrive was its own reward. Emma married young, at 18, to a neighboring rancher's son named David. It was a love match, and Thea saw echoes of her own whirlwind romance in the way Emma and David looked at each other. Rose became a teacher like her mother, opening a school in Sacramento with Caroline's help, shaping young minds with patience and passion. In 1898, Bennett and Thea became grandparents for the first time when Emma gave birth to a daughter. They named her Thea after her grandmother, and Bennett cried when he held the tiny infant, overwhelmed by the continuity of it all, the way life circled and renewed. More grandchildren followed. Emma and David had 4 children in total, 2 boys and 2 girls. James married a sweet-natured woman named Helen in 1895, and they had 3 sons who ran wild on the ranch, keeping everyone on their toes. Even Rose eventually married a fellow teacher named Samuel, and they had one daughter, a quiet child who loved books as much as her mother. The ranch continued to prosper under James's management, though it remained the Parker family home, the place where everyone gathered for holidays and birthdays and simple Sunday dinners. Bennett slowed as he aged, the old injury catching up with him, but he never lost his joy in life, his gratitude for every day he had been given. On a spring morning in 1912, Thea found Bennett in the garden, sitting on the bench he had built years ago, looking out at the view he loved. He was 75 years old, his hair white as snow, his body marked by decades of hard work and harder healing. But his eyes were still that clear mountain lake blue, and they lit up when he saw her approaching. "Come sit with me," he invited, patting the bench beside him. Thea settled beside him, her own body showing the years, her hair more silver than brown now. But she felt young when she was with Bennett, felt like the girl who had run toward a broken cowboy without thinking of the cost. 30 years, Bennett said softly. 30 years since we married. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like I've loved you my whole life. 30 of the best years, Thea agreed. And many more to come, God willing. Bennett took her hand, threading his fingers through hers in the gesture that had become second nature over the decades. "I want you to know something, Thea. If I could go back to that day, knowing everything that would happen, I wouldn't change a thing. The pain, the fear, the months of not knowing if I'd walk again, it was all worth it to have this life with you." Thea's throat tightened with emotion. "Don't talk like you're saying goodbye, we have years yet." "I know. I just wanted you to hear it, wanted you to know that every single day with you has been a gift." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the ranch wake up around them. James was already out checking on the cattle, his eldest son trailing behind him. Emma's children would arrive later in the day for Sunday dinner, filling the house with noise and laughter. Rose had written that she and Samuel would visit next month, bringing their daughter. The life they had built together was full and rich, rooted in the soil of California, but nourished by the love that had sustained them through everything. From a terrible accident to a tender romance, from a struggling ranch to a thriving legacy, from just the two of them to a sprawling family tree, Bennett and Thea had weathered it all together. "You remember what you said to me the day we met?" Thea asked. "Well, right after the accident." Bennett thought back, his memory not quite as sharp as it had been. "I asked about the horse. You did. And I knew then that you were special. Most men would have been cursing or panicking, but you were worried about that Bronc. He was just scared. It wasn't his fault." Bennett smiled. "Whatever happened to that horse anyway? Cyrus told me later that they retired him, put him out to pasture for the rest of his days. He lived a long life as horses go. Good. He deserved it." That was Bennett, Thea thought. Always generous, always willing to see the best in everyone and everything. It was one of the million reasons she loved him. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the spring air, they remained on the bench, talking and reminiscing, sometimes sitting in companionable quiet. This was their rhythm now, the peace of old love, deep and abiding. The passion was still there, banked but ready to flare when they were alone in their room at night, but it was tempered by something richer, something that had survived decades of living and loving together. James's voice called from the barn, something about a new calf being born, and Bennett started to rise. Thea put a hand on his arm, stilling him. "Let James handle it. You've earned a morning of rest." Bennett settled back, acknowledging the truth of it. There had been a time when he would have insisted on being there for every birth, every crisis, every moment of ranch life. But he had learned to let go, to trust that his son was capable, to accept the limitations age had imposed. "You're right," he said. "Besides, I'd rather sit here with you." Emma arrived with her brood around noon, and the quiet ranch erupted into joyful chaos. The grandchildren swarmed Bennett and Thea, full of stories about school and friends and 100 small dramas. Emma's youngest, a boy of 5, climbed into Bennett's lap and demanded a story about the old days when Grandpa was a cowboy. Bennett obliged, telling sanitized versions of his adventures, editing out the danger and pain, focusing on the humor and excitement. Thea listened with half an ear, having heard these stories countless times, but she never tired of watching Bennett with the children. He was so patient with them, so endlessly interested in their little lives. Dinner was a loud, crowded affair around the big table that had been extended twice to accommodate the growing family. Helen had made her famous fried chicken, Emma brought fresh bread, and Thea contributed pies made from the first berries of the season. They ate and talked and laughed, voices overlapping, children squirming in their seats, the kind of beautiful chaos that only a large, loving family could produce. After the meal, the men went out to look at some fence that needed mending, and the women gathered in the kitchen to clean up. The older grandchildren took the younger ones outside to play, and for a moment Thea stood at the window watching it all, her heart so full it hurt. "You look happy, Ma," Emma said, drying a plate and setting it in the cupboard. "I am," Thea replied simply. "So very happy." Later, after everyone had gone home and the ranch had settled into evening quiet, Bennett and Thea prepared for bed. It was a ritual they had perfected over 30 years, moving around each other with practiced ease. Bennett hung up his shirt and suspenders. Thea brushed out her long hair, now almost entirely silver, and braided it for sleep. They climbed into the bed they had shared for 3 decades, Bennett on the left, Thea on the right, and she curled into his side the way she had since their wedding night. "I meant what I said this morning," Bennett murmured into the darkness. "Best 30 years of my life." "Mine too," Thea whispered back. "Every single day." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and in the morning they would wake and do it all again. Days would turn to weeks, weeks to months, months to years. There would be more grandchildren, more celebrations, more quiet mornings on the bench in the garden. There would be losses too, friends and family passing on, the inevitable sorrows that came with a long life. But through it all, Bennett and Thea would have each other. The cowboy whose spine had been broken and the woman who had carried him home, bound together by a love that had started in tragedy and blossomed into something beautiful and enduring. They would grow old together on the ranch that Bennett had inherited and Thea had helped build into a legacy. They would watch their children's children grow and thrive. They would live fully and deeply, savoring every moment, knowing how precious it all was because they had both come so close to losing everything. The story of how they met, the Bronc and the accident and the long recovery, would become family legend, told and retold to each new generation. But for Bennett and Thea, it was simply the beginning, the first chapter of a love story that would span more than half a century. And though they couldn't know it on that spring evening in 1912, they would have many more years together, years filled with the simple, profound joy of loving and being loved in return. The seasons turned, as they always did in the Sacramento Valley. Summers blazed hot and dry. Autumn brought relief and harvest. Winter rains greened the hills, and spring painted the landscape with wildflowers. Through it all, the Parker Ranch endured, a testament to hard work and stubborn determination, to the love of two people who had refused to give up on each other, or the life they wanted to build. In 1920, Bennett and Thea celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together 3 generations of Parkers. The house and yard were full of people, laughter ringing out across the land Bennett loved. He was 83 years old now, moving slowly but still sharp as a tack, still eager to share stories and wisdom with anyone who would listen. Thea was 60, her face lined but beautiful, her eyes still bright with intelligence and humor. James gave a toast, raising his glass and speaking of his parents' devotion, their partnership, the way they had built a life together that had blessed so many. Caroline, elderly herself now, dabbed at her eyes and remembered the frightened young man she had visited in a boarding house so many years ago, barely clinging to hope. The grandchildren, some of them with children of their own now, cheered and clapped. And Bennett, standing with his arm around Thea, looked out at the sea of faces, at the family they had created, at the legacy of love they would leave behind, and felt a peace so deep it was almost transcendent. He had been given a second chance at life when that Bronc threw him, and he had used it well. He had loved deeply, worked hard, raised good children, and built something that would outlast him. "What are you thinking?" Thea asked, reading the expression on his face. "That I'm the luckiest man who ever lived," Bennett replied, "and that I love you more today than I did 40 years ago, which I wouldn't have thought possible." "Only 40, Thea teased. "I feel like I've loved you for 100 years. "Then here's to 100 more, Bennett said, kissing her to the cheers of their assembled family. They didn't get 100 more years, of course. Life wasn't a fairy tale, and even the greatest love couldn't stop time. But they got 18 more, 18 years of sunrises and sunsets, of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, of quiet moments stolen from busy days, of hands held and kisses shared, and the 1,000 small intimacies that made up a marriage. Bennett passed away in his sleep in the spring of 1938, at the age of 91. He went peacefully, lying beside the woman who had been his whole world for more than half a century. Thea, who was 78, woke to find him gone, and though her heart shattered, she knew he had lived a full life, had died content and loved. She followed him 2 years later, her body finally giving out after 8 decades of hard work and harder living. Her last words were his name, spoken with love and longing, and the children who gathered around her bed took comfort in the knowledge that their parents would be together again, in whatever came after this life. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a simple headstone that bore their names and the dates of their lives. Beneath those facts, James had inscribed a line that captured everything they had been to each other. Together in life, together in love, together for all eternity. The ranch stayed in the Parker family for generations, passed down from James to his sons, from his sons to their children. The story of Bennett and Thea became the foundation myth of the family, the tale that every Parker child learned, the example of what love should be. Strong and enduring, brave and true, capable of surviving anything if two people held fast to each other. And on quiet spring mornings when the wildflowers bloomed and the sutter butts rose purple against the horizon, you could almost feel them there, Bennett and Thea, walking the land they had loved, their hands clasped together, their love as alive as it had ever been. The Bronc that had broken Bennett's spine had, in the end, given him the greatest gift of his life. And Thea, who had carried the Cowboy home and refused to leave, had found her own salvation in loving him. Two broken people who had healed each other, who had built something beautiful from the ruins of a terrible accident, who had proved that even the worst tragedies could become the beginnings of the greatest love stories. Their legacy lived on in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who bore the Parker name, in the ranch that still thrived a century after Bennett had inherited it, in the love stories that their descendants would tell their own children. Bennett and Thea Parker had lived and loved and left the world better than they found it. And in the end, what more could anyone ask for than that? Their story was complete, their love immortalized, their legacy secure. The cowboy who had been broken and the woman who had saved him had found their happy ending. And it had been sweeter and richer and longer than either of them could have dreamed possible on that terrible, wonderful day in July of 1882, when a Bronc had changed both their lives forever.